Okay, all right, won't we get started? It's 12:02, and we are recording this session, so thanks for joining. And looks like we've got a good group today. So we've got James Stewart is going to be presenting this today about business agility within the UK government, and we've left it kind of open. And then this is the first session, so we're going to use a little bit of our time to get organized, do intros, and get you all out of here and back to work or to your normal life in less than an hour. So thanks again for joining. And my name's Jeremy Pullen, just as my first intro. So I'm a DevOps and DevSecOps consultant, currently working in the financial industry, and have just recently gone out on my own. I'm also a facilitator for the Agility Conference this coming March, and I hope all of you have signed up for that. It's going to be awesome. And finally, live in Atlanta, have a wife and 2 kids, and have been here my whole life. Atlanta, Georgia. So why don't we just go, we have a big group actually, so why don't we go briefly around and everyone take let's go in order. I'll call you so that we keep organized. So if anyone doesn't want to do an intro, you're more than welcome. If you wouldn't mind keeping yourselves on mute in the meantime so that we don't have background noise. So, James, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I'm James Stewart. I'm based in London, UK. I am a consultant on a variety of things, but sort of technology-related change primarily. Spending a lot of time around cybersecurity at the moment. I'll talk a bit more about what I did before that in a little while.
Okay, Nate.
Hi, I'm Nate Ashford. I live in Minneapolis. I'm an independent consultant doing technical coaching, especially around DevOps and continuous delivery.
Great. Danny?
Hey, Danny Preston. I'm leading Agile transformation around Equifax, and so work with teams all over the globe. James, I'll be in London in probably a couple months.
Okay, and apologies if I think we'll get everyone, but let's go with Zuzi.
Hi, I'm Zuzi. I'm from the Czech Republic, from Prague, and I'm Agile coach, certified Scrum trainer, and looking forward for the conference in New York where I'm facilitating. So.
And Andy.
Andy Zucri. I'm in Atlanta with Cotivity. I'm an internal change agent to lead enterprise-wide Agile transformations across all our business domains, including technology. And my role is as the VP of Enterprise Agility.
Great. John? Spengler, I should say. John, if you hear us, feel free to unmute an intro. I'm going to go to Joey, and then we'll come back to John. We can't hear you, Joey.
Sorry, I should unmute. Sorry. I'm a Kanban coach and trainer. I work here in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been doing a good bit with the government over the past 2 years and enjoy doing a lot of regulated type work with the federal space.
Okay, Patrick? Patrick, we can't hear you. We'll come back to you. And Shingi.
Hi, so my name is Shingi. I'm operating out of Toronto. I'm working with Scotiabank as an internal change agent, helping to lead change across the enterprise as the organization continues to transition to Agile.
Welcome. Samar?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Summer. I am an Agile coach with Agile Transformation, so just helping companies transform.
Welcome. And we have a number of folks who don't have their names listed. They've dialed in. So let's see, the 301 number, you're welcome to unmute intro.
I think that was me, Jeremy. Excuse me, that's Joey.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I dialed in too. This is Salah Alethi. I am an independent consultant. My focus is on agile coaching and professional coaching. And I've worked in different industries, including the government, healthcare, and telecommunications.
Welcome. Okay, and then we have a 240 number, a 415 number, and a 585 number.
Yeah, this is Manjeet Singh from the 240 number in the Washington, D.C. area. I am a enterprise agile coach and a CST. I have my own agile consulting company called Agilus. We serve both government and commercial clients. Happy to be on the call. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome. And
this is Marsha. I'm the 415 number. I'm a business anthropologist. Been a consultant and coach with business leaders facing change for almost 40 years. So I do a lot of cultural change work. And agility is, at the moment, the big challenge.
Great. Thank you. Glad to have you. And I think we've got one more.
Yeah, this is Lisa Cooney. I'm at the 585 number. I'm an agile coach with Excella in Washington, D.C. And I'm currently working on a big contract with the Department of Homeland Security.
Great. And going back to those we missed before, I see Bob Payne, you've joined. Do you want to introduce yourself? We lost Bob. Okay, John Spengler, are you on still?
Hey, I'm here. Sorry about that. So somebody was at my desk when you came to my name. My name's John Spengler. I'm a service management architect and lean evangelist at DaVita. We're a kidney care dialysis company.
Great. And we missed Patrick before. So Patrick, you want to try again? Patrick Lee.
Can you hear me?
We can now, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. They interrupted another call there, so that's why. Anyway, I'm
sorry, this is Bob Payne. I'm training today, so we ran a little late. So sorry I'm joining late.
Yeah.
Welcome, Bob. All right, go ahead, Patrick.
I'm working on Toronto and actually working with Shingy, and very interested in the business agility side of things.
Awesome. Well, everyone, welcome. And just in case you're sure you're on the right call, this is the community of practice around governance and strategy for the Business Agility Institute. And so I'm just one of you, and I'm just volunteering to help get the group organized. I'm hoping to get all of us face to face during the conference at some time. So please reply to the thread about that on Slack if you're interested. And without any further ado, let's talk to James. So James is going to talk about business agility in the UK government, and we'll spend about 20 minutes on that. That'll take us to 12:30, and then the rest of the time we'll use just getting organized for future calls, building an agenda, and just talking and getting to know each other. And so, James, I will hand things over to you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to try and set up screen sharing so I can use some slides, but hopefully I'll explain enough of what's on those slides so that those who are on the phone don't miss out too much. So not done this before. Okay, can some people see that? It's a title slide. Great.
Yes.
Okay. So my name's James Stewart. I'm a sort of software developer by background, like many who've kind of come of age as the web has, done all sorts of things, mostly driven by the web, and used to run my own agency. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, got pulled into a project which was looking at how can the UK government rethink how it engages with digital services, digital change. The backdrop for that was that we had a new government coming in who had a strong agenda to cut costs, save a lot of the money that was being spent, particularly on IT. And also we'd had some very large, disastrous service delivery issues. There was a new IT project for our national health system, which had gone billions of pounds over budget. That was a significant moment when people realized that we needed a different approach. And so a few of us were asked to come in, demonstrate a different way of working, and that led to quite a lot of change across the system. So I spent about 6 years working on that, culminating in a role as Deputy Chief Technology Officer for UK government. And now I'm independent consultant working with our National Cybersecurity Centre and a number of others. So I just mentioned some of the backdrop. A lot of it came out of a report that was commissioned in 2010, which was initially meant to look at the main government website that we had at the time, how that could be better. But Martha Lane Fox, who wrote that, took a step back and said, this is a moment when UK government needs to completely rethink how does it engage citizens online, how does it provide services, and move away from the massive outsourcing culture that we had. So I came in with a few others to effectively just build a prototype of what it would look like to start to pull that together, to have a single place online where people could find what they needed, regardless of whether or not they understood the structure of government. That was a route in to looking at a lot more of how does the system work, how do we deliver, and to demonstrate that long waterfall outsourced projects just didn't give us the freedom that we wanted and weren't the most cost-effective way of working. That prototype was very well received, led into us forming a new team, becoming civil servants, sitting at the heart of government, and initially continuing with this web theme of building what's now known as gov.uk, the single domain and entry point for people to interact with government online. We built up an organization that went over a couple of years. We grew from 6 of us to in the region of 600 people. So that was quite a rapid scaling experience. But we also had to work quite widely across government. Off the back of that, we worked on 25 different services, collaborating with different departments. We built out a set of common components that people could use, and started to look at reforming how we did procurement and a number of other kind of core processes. The result of that has been pretty dramatic. In just 3 years, we saved over £3.5 billion out of a combined IT budget that was in the region of 7 or 8 billion. That some of that was in technology cost savings, but there was also quite a bit which was in process improvement. But more importantly, I think we started to demonstrate the opportunities that were there if we embraced a more agile and crucially user-centered approach to providing government services. And of course, engaging with all of that led us straight into where all the structural problems have been in doing new things, in moving at pace, and in having agility. So governance structures and the way we work with money, our procurement mechanisms, how we buy things, which was all weighted towards very large contracts with very large suppliers, a security compliance regime that didn't really make things particularly secure, but certainly slowed things down. And what I'm going to cover here, and I'll say now, I haven't paid close attention to how long it takes to get through all of this material. So feel free to speed me up or slow me down or stop me if not. It's just a few of the efforts that we made to start to look into this governance theme. Because what we realized was that while we had a huge amount of governance, it wasn't giving us the sort of insight that we needed into whether things were on track. And initially, a lot of us we were attacked for saying, people thought that we were saying we shouldn't have governance around what we were doing because we were moving in a way that people didn't recognize, moving at pace, very team-centric. But actually, it was that most of the governance we saw simply wasn't fit for purpose and didn't give people the clarity to make good decisions. I mean, experts weren't able to use their expertise. You had people who were completely ill-informed around the best way to approach technology, user experience, so any of the things that we needed to pull on, guiding that. And it also, the thing that really has struck me throughout is the way that so many of the governance mechanisms that we'd set up, particularly the funding mechanisms, had disempowered our senior leadership. We'd made it very, very difficult for senior leadership to set direction and to adapt or to even be confident that they knew what was going on. So the first thing that we set out to do was to try and make sure that we were modeling the culture that we wanted to see created, because we knew that we were being looked at as in our unit as the model of how things could work across government. I've got here an image that says, make things open, it makes things better. That was one of our mantras that I'll come back to. But we put a very strong focus on having an extremely open culture. We pushed a lot of open source. I think we were the first national government to have a GitHub account and to push as much of our code as possible out there. We blogged very heavily. And we often found that working in public was the best way we had of doing internal communications. But it was at the heart of this transparency was very important to us. We also put a huge amount of emphasis on teams and multidisciplinary teams, sort of core tenet of so much agile delivery, this strong team. And that was a theme that we just kept repeating over and over again, was how important the team was. And stuck up on the wall in our office was the phrase trust users delivery, which was, we had a lot of slogans and mantras because of the sort of cultural change we were trying to bring. That starting with an assumption of trust was a really important underpinning of everything that we were doing. And we tried to be very, very clear about the principles by which we operated. And probably the most public example of that is a set of 10 design principles that we published quite early on. The first of which is start with needs, user needs, not government needs, which emphasized that we weren't simply there to deliver what government had decided somewhere that it needed to do and to do that faster and cheaper, but actually to push the emphasis back on how do we know that this is meeting the needs of end users, of citizens, of visitors to the UK, and so on. And there's a set of other principles. I won't read them all out now, but they were trying to instill a much more iterative but user-centered approach to how we did everything. We also, over time, realized that we needed to more clearly address some questions around governance. I've got a link here, we can send it around afterwards, to a blog post, introduced some governance principles that we developed, which were to, number one, don't slow down delivery. 2, decisions when they're needed and at the right level. Number 3, do it with the right people. 4, go see for yourself. 5, only do it if it adds value. And 6, trust and verify. And I think the most important of those for us was often number 4, the go see for yourself, because we'd seen an awful lot of governance mechanisms that never actually showed the people providing a governance function what it was we were doing. And it was incredible that it was a real revelation to a lot of senior people and elected officials and senior civil servants when we just show up with a laptop or a tablet and say, this is the interface to the service that you've asked us to work on. Have a go with it before we start talking about where we are with all of the underpinning details. You should experience this thing. And time and again, we'd come across environments where that was just missing. That sense of you should actually see the result. You should see the thing you're governing. You should experience it, not just get dry reports. To take things to another level, one of the efforts that we went to was actually installing new leadership in a number of parts of government, particularly with digital and technology skills. Because what we'd seen as we got started was that this combination of complicated, cumbersome processes, missing skills because we'd outsourced so much of our technology expertise, our design expertise, and so on. And then the effect of time on that had led to a kind of learned helplessness at our most senior levels, where people spent more time preparing for their projects going wrong than thinking about how to make them go right, or whether they were even doing the right thing in the first place. And to address that required a lot of efforts from a lot of angles, but that included bringing some new leaders in who just had some of those missing skills, but then providing support for them. So we established 3 new cross-government forums, one called Digital Leaders, who were really the senior people in each government department who were focused on the public-facing services that department was providing. Technology leaders who would collaborate with those digital leaders to make sure that we had the technology in place for our workforce and to support those services. And more recently, data leaders who were looking at, have we got the right skills and processes around how we manage data? So we established those as forums and got them recognized at a very high level. So the most senior officials in each government department would appoint those people. There was some ministerial oversight, so that's the kind of cabinet member elected officials would see that, which meant that they had a lot of decision-making authority. But because a lot of those sorts of committees often then don't make decisions, they just have that authority, we very deliberately crafted a program of big decisions that needed making and worked with them to make those. The first of which was that gov.uk project that I talked about. So agreeing that we were no longer going to have the 700 plus different websites that we had, that we were going to have one. And it was going to have a very specific set of rules around it, a specific operating model. We got all of those people signed up and agreeing it. For the technology leaders, we established a new code of practice of what do we think good technology looks like and got them to own that and agree that. And then over time, we also started to change a lot of other aspects of how we thought about how we provided technology. And we went from an environment where very few of the people in that technology leaders group were people who really understood technology much at all. But they'd were committed to quite an old school model to getting to a point where we made some quite radical decisions. So there's a post-it note on screen at the moment that says the internet is okay. That was a decision we made a couple of years ago. We were no longer going to invest in these massive private networks that parts of government had. We had to take people on quite a journey to get there. But it was a very deliberate program of both pushing through some reforms that were needed, but also developing these leadership forums to make those sorts of decisions. Another thing that we really focused on was changing some of the controls environment. So this is the more normal kind of governance stuff. Early on, when we'd formed our government digital service, which was our unit, we joined forces with a technology reform team that had been created about the same time as us, slightly off to the side. And together we got a group of spending controls for any IT spend that happened across government. And we tied those to that technology code of practice I just mentioned. It was one of our principal ways of driving out savings. But we very deliberately pushed it and saying, we need to start staffing our controls regimes with people who really are domain experts, which we hadn't done before. And we need to start showing value from that quickly, not just in terms of the savings that we get, but as a way of kind of targeting support and consultancy. We also put in place what we call the Digital by Default Service Standard. So it was a set of, at the time, 26 points, now 18, that all new government digital services were assessed by, and started to put in place a new expectation of a different set of gates than we had before. Now, we wanted to get away from a kind of gated delivery approach entirely, but initially structuring a set of gates around a more natural delivery cadence was the step towards that. So we called that Discovery, Alpha, Beta, Live. And then we would assess things at each step with a panel of experts against the points in our service standard. We also got some controls around hiring and around the use of domain names. The hiring was particularly useful because it meant that we could make sure that we were, it was the way of getting into the conversations to say, if you're going to hire a new CTO for your department, have you got anybody technical on the interview panel? We're going to make sure of things like that. Now, what we learned over time is that the real power that we could have had from some of those control mechanisms was actually in what we were learning and building feedback loops around them. So having a technology spend control, the ideal was that would actually be the way in which you then build a map of what technology exists across government, which nobody had had. We went some way towards that, but we discovered that that's where it actually got really hard, because it was difficult to break out of a reactive mode for that kind of work. But what we managed to do was establish a number of communities of practice around government and to start to feed them the things that we were seeing through these mechanisms. So that was a more grassroots network that informed those leadership networks. But we gradually, in the places where we were successful, we brought all of this together to shift where some power sat in some of the departments. So you'd find that a request for some spend for something would come from one part of a department, and it would look like completely the wrong way to do things. They were beholden to a supplier selling them an old-fashioned approach. They were going to be locked in. They couldn't be agile with it. But because we built the relationship with other people in that department who maybe weren't being listened to but knew a better way, we could use our control to empower those people. And those were always the things I think that we were proudest of, was when we could kind of orchestrate that use of this quite heavyweight control mechanism, but to empower people to do things in a better way. We did find that while things like our service standard and the Discovery Alpha Beta Live progression moved things forward a long way, and were again quite key in empowering people, and using that service standard was stuck up on the walls across government by so many different teams who were able to use it as a lever to get their leadership to work, to let them work in a different way. There were some things that we were perhaps a little slow on around really explaining that we never meant that as a really static linear process. So one of my former colleagues has written quite a good blog post about that, which again we can share afterwards. But one of the things that I've really learned from this process is that we probably should have invested a bit more in saying, this is a different model. we're going to move to it, get it in place as we did, but then go back and start poking at okay, now we've got that, how are we iterating within it? And just because you've done a prototype of something doesn't mean that you necessarily have to carry it through to a production system. I think there's one other area I was going to touch on, which is that as we'd started, so we'd established some new control mechanisms, we got some new leadership in to really make an impact deeper. We recognized that we needed to get into changing how various policies were set up. And the starkest area for that was how we did security across government. So we had an environment where we had 6 different levels of classification that documents or data could be held at. So from unclassified, so totally public stuff, through to top secret. We had a notion of a set of business impact levels that helped us understand the significance of something going wrong, which went from 6, there's 7 of them, from 0, we really don't care, through to 6, rioting in the streets and war breaks out kind of impact. And we had a huge number of mandated processes and documents around that. And it was a real example of everything that we were doing wrong, because we'd put all these processes in place for the right reasons, that we needed to think about our security risk as part of our overall business risk profile, that senior people needed to make decisions across all of that. But by putting so much process around it, we'd actually sort of created a mist around it and a mystique. We'd led to huge documents being created that none of those senior people had time to read. And we'd really created a cottage industry of consultants who could produce these things without ever actually thinking about the real risk. You spent so much time filling in the forms that you never thought about the actual risks and the right security controls. And because there was so much documentation, you locked things down. When what you want for an awful lot of security these days is to be able to change things rapidly in response to evolving threats. So we worked with some other teams around government to make some very radical changes to that. So we changed the set of security classifications, which had been there since World War II, to say, actually, we'll only have 3: official, secret, and top secret. Almost everything government does in the UK is at official. If we're going to simplify that, we're pushing a lot more responsibility and authority to individuals to then work out, how do I handle information at that level? But that was a big part of creating an environment for cultural change. We also removed the requirement to follow some very specific risk management practices, which wasn't an easy decision at all, because it then created a space where people in lots of different parts of government had to come up with their own alternative processes. But there was a sort of deliberate move there to create a bit of a vacuum, to force some people to step up and start to model a different way of doing things, and to create space for people who are trying to do good things but have been held back. I suspect that we're going to see over the next couple of years a move back towards mandating some practices, but having had that gap in the middle hopefully means that we'll have had a chance to really think afresh, which we never would have done if we just approached it as, we need to replace one set of mandated processes with a new set of mandated processes that would just be a small iteration of what came before. We also worked with our Treasury on new guidance around how to manage spending. That's taken a lot longer to come in. It's the management of money that's harder, but there's some interesting guidance there if anybody wants to have a look. Again, can circulate a URL. And so I think that it's had quite a big impact across government. There are now a lot of agile teams working in different ways who have been able to do that because we focused on some of these elements of governance and leadership. obviously a lot further to go, and it's patchy because it's a big organization. I think we learned that by demonstrating a different way, by building new skills in our leadership, by really trying to focus on our clarity of purpose, and by living that open culture, we could have a huge impact and empower a lot of people across the system who'd wanted to work in a different way. So that's what I wanted to cover for today. Hopefully it's been useful. It feels like I'm sort of grabbing a bunch of different things and cramming them together. Yeah, I guess over to the conversation.
Okay, fantastic. James, thank you for doing that. It was a very enlightening presentation. And so just in the spirit of this being a community of practice and not just a time for a one-way presentation. Well, James, is there any feedback that you'd like and any conversation that you'd like to have with the group around this content?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously so much when we're talking about governance and agility. There's so many different dimensions to that, and it means so many different things to people. So I think what I was hoping to do is as much just kind of throw out, here are some areas that we looked at to see if they're interesting and they stimulate conversation in different directions. I'm always in, I love talking about that stuff. So, but yeah, it's a community of practice. It's not a Q&A session. I guess I'm interested in hearing particularly what other people have done around aligning different forms of governance. The really important thing for us with that service standard was, and I meant to talk about it a bit more earlier, was that was a deliberately quite multidisciplinary thing in and of itself. And so an assessment with it was done by a multidisciplinary team. And that was a bit of a shock to our system. I don't know if other people have done similar things to kind of pull together different types of governance. Okay, so part of today is to start figuring out who we are as a group. And so I think everyone just be comfortable with some ambiguity as we figure that out. But why don't you provide some comments, any key highlights from James's talk or anything else that stood out to you? And I'll get us started. And I have a quote that we have plenty of governance, but it didn't give insight. It wasn't fit for purpose. And then the other thing, that funding mechanisms had disempowered senior leadership. So those are two of the things that really resonated with me from the talk. And that is really the fit for purpose nature of governance and how you apply it to solving real problems. So that's, any other comments and questions?
Yeah, I've got one, Jeremy. What was the actual time frame in which this took place? How long did it take for all of that to fall into place? Because of all those various conversations you need to have, it seems like that would be awfully hard to pull off quickly.
Yeah, so I can give on that. So we started on that journey in early 2011. So we focused initially on just delivering gov.uk because we had to build some people had to be confident in us as a team before we could do anything else. So that went totally public in 2012. And then I think it was 2013 we brought in that service standard. And that took us about a year to get in place. And the spending control mechanism had kicked in 2011, but really stepped up in 2012. And those are things that, from my pre-government experience, seemed slow, and from what I now know, was really fast. And I think that there were two things that allowed us to move at that pace. One was actually the energy of the new government coming in. Just new politicians want to make a mark quickly, so we were able to harness that. And then one of those politicians in particular was very, very focused on backing this. And he paid attention. He's called Francis Maud. He was the Minister for the Cabinet Office. He read the spending control submissions that came in every day for 5 years. And for a politician to pay that level of attention to technology spending is just astonishing. But having that senior drive and focus let us move a lot faster than if we'd been trying to do it more grassroots or more kind of at the sort of middle management of government layer. And I think that's
Thank you
kind
very
of a
much.
key point, is that very senior leadership backing that pays attention. That's so valuable.
This is Marcia. I found it particularly useful to hear the term learn defensiveness. Actually, that may not be the way you said it, but what I heard was learn defensiveness in senior leaders. And later you used the term clarity of purpose. And in my head, I put them together. That clarity of purpose will trump learned defensiveness. So if you would like to say more about that, I'd love to hear it. Or if anybody else wants to say something.
Yeah, so the term I actually used was learned helplessness, but I think learned defensiveness applies as well. Yeah, I think the clarity of purpose was just the only thing we had to kind of cut through some of the defensiveness that we saw. We needed that kind of common reference point for any conversation. The learned helplessness was perhaps harder, but they're sort of entwined, because there's a just general kind of confidence element that we had to spend a lot of time with some people just building up their confidence, because there were a lot of very capable people who'd spent so long not being able to make decisions that working with them to just quietly, whether it's coaching or mentoring or just other techniques, build up confidence, which often helped cut through defensiveness and helplessness.
Okay, we're at the 15-minute mark, and so what I'd like to suggest is that we continue this conversation on Slack. If anyone is not on Slack on the governance strategy thread, then please reach out to me, and I will get you an invite. It's an open community, and it's a good place for us to continue dialoguing on this. And I'll post a recording on to that Slack thread once I have the link. So for our 15 minutes remaining, what I'd like to suggest is two things. One is feedback and ideas about the format of these sessions. It looks like, with a group of 20 people, there are limitations for how much two-way dialogue there can be, but I really think that today was a great session and is going to be a great springboard for what comes next. So how do we keep the conversation two-way while also providing a good platform for presentations and dry runs of presentations like this that James and the rest of us can use for future for broader audiences. So, bottom line is the question's this: what would you like to hear in future sessions, and what would you like to adjust in terms of the format that we use today?
Jeremy, this is Manjeet. I know I signed in about 7 minutes after the call started, so maybe I missed this. I'm a little unclear as to overall purpose of the group. Could you just recap it in a minute or less, if you would, please?
Yeah, let me frame it this way. There's the initial just kickoff, let's get a group of people interested in governance and strategy in Agile and start to get to know each other and then refine the purpose from there. But in terms of maybe a straw man that we can work on, it would be to be an exchange of ideas and a place for people with ideas that they want to distribute to the larger business agility community to try out those ideas before they go to kind of to the main business agility conference or online sessions. So there's going to be a rotating set of broader business agility sessions that Evan has been curating, and you saw one this month on Agile in HR. There are going to be others. So we're viewing this as being a place for community-generated content to mature and get to those broader sessions, but really developed by the community of practice versus being completely curated by Evan or others.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Anyone else?
So can I just do a quick follow-up since you asked feedback? I thought I liked this approach or the format today where we had one specific topic and a 15-20 minute dedicated to it. So I like that. It allows us to hone in on something and do it a little bit deeper, but open to other suggestions, but I did like the format today.
Anyone else? That's great feedback.
Hi, this is Lisa Cooney. I think it'd be great to vary the format. No need to have the same format each time. So, just take various suggestions and try different things and see what resonates and keep experimenting. I mean, I liked today's presentation. I thought it was great. I learned a lot. It was interesting to hear about what they've done, the success that they've had. But I could see the value in many other types of presentations or formats for our meetings.
I agree. This is Marcia. Let's experiment. We're agile, right?
Absolutely, and this was our first big experiment. Okay, so it's 12:50. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jeremy, this is just I guess one format to explore that might help is the lean format. So I agree with what's being said. I mean, presentations have a lot of insight. Maybe there are some deeper topics like budgeting and culture, and maybe we can if we have like some type of a board where everyone can post topics and build on each other's ideas. We can have a bunch of different ideas to what resonates the most with the group, and maybe start from there.
Right. Okay. does anyone have something that they would like to put out for our next meeting, which I'm expecting that we won't be able to have it before the conference. So I'm looking at the last 2 weeks of March as potential dates. So does anyone have anything they'd like to volunteer as a topic where they could take the lead or present something that's going on in their space? Okay, let's do this. We have a Slack channel. Is anyone not on the Slack channel?
Jeremy, this is Manjeet. I'm not sure if I am. I'll have to check, but if you could also do the same, that would be appreciated.
Okay, so we'll make sure that there's a conversation on the Slack channel around the date and content for our next meeting, which I'm expecting to be the one of the last 2 weeks in March. And the other thing will be a thread on when we can meet face-to-face for those of you who are going to be at the Business Agility Conference.
Okay.
So I guess, so that's the last question. Just as a quick poll, who's going, and would you like to have a face-to-face session while we're there in New York?
I'll be there. This is Manjeet.
Okay, good. All right, Andy's there. Lisa, Manjeet, I'll be there, and awesome.
I'll be there. This is Marsha. I'll be there.
Awesome. Okay, and so just tentatively, I don't know all of the schedule stuff, but I'm thinking that what are you thinking? Maybe Wednesday at the end of the first day, we just get together and do a face-to-face? Would that work for everyone?
Yeah, should work.
Okay, great. So I'll see if we can't get Evan to announce it during the conference as well, just for those who want to join and who might not have heard this, and then we'll go from there. So let's just plan on connecting on Slack about the specifics, but I'll use that as the straw man. All right, it's 12:54. I promised we'd get us out of the call before an hour, and so any final comments and thoughts before we wrap up?
Thank you for putting this together.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
All right, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
We will talk again on Slack and at the conference, and look forward to our next section in March.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.